Hello. Today is January 29th, 2021, and I'd just like to take a moment to thank my 15 subscribers. 2 months ago, I started this channel, and I feel like 15 is a pretty good number. Ignore the fact, however, that 3 of those subscribers are 3 of my fake accounts. So, besides those, well, factor those in. The numbers look better, all right? Only up from here, guys. Tell you what, you want to know what that increase is? That's a 500% increase. I would like to wish those subscribers a very pleasant day. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I'm coming. Okay, so let's continue on with Demian. We're on chapter 7, Ava. I'm gonna have a very awkward break in the middle of this because this chapter's long and there's no breaks for me to go off of. So thank you guys for joining me, and let's get started with the reading. Chapter 7, Ava. One time during the holidays, I visited the house where years before, Demian had lived with his mother. An old woman was strolling in the garden. I spoke to her and learned that the house belonged to her. I inquired after the Demian family. She remembered them very well, but she did not know where they lived at present. Sensing my interest in them, she took me into the house, and took out a leather album and showed me a photograph of Demian's mother. I could hardly remember her, but now that I had the small photograph before me, my heart stood still. It was the picture of my dreams. There she was, the tall, almost masculine figure, looking like her son, but with maternal traits of severity and deep passion, beautiful and alluring, beautiful and unapproachable. Damon and his mother, fate and lover, there was no mistaking her. The discovery that my dream image existed on this earth affected me like some fantastic miracle. So there was a woman who looked like that, who bore the features of my destiny. Where was she? Where? And she was Demian's mother. Shortly after this, I embarked on my journey. A strange journey. I traveled restlessly from place to place, following every impulse, always searching for this woman. There were days when everyone I met reminded me of her, echoed her, resembled her, enticing me along the alleys in strange cities, railway stations, trains like a confused dream. There were other days when I saw how futile my search was. Then I would sit idly somewhere in a park, a hotel garden, a waiting room, look into myself and endeavor to bring life back to the image within me. But it had now become shy and evanescent. I was unable to sleep. I had to be satisfied with cat naps on railway journeys through unknown landscapes. Once a woman in Zurich followed me. She was a pretty, somewhat impudent creature. I hardly looked at her, but continued on my way, as if she were made of air. I would have rather died then and there than pay attention to any other woman for even an hour. I felt that my fate was drawing me on. I felt that the moment of fulfillment was approaching, and I was mad with impatience at not being able to do anything about it. Once in a station, I think it was Innsbruck, I caught sight of a woman who reminded me of Ava. She was seated by the window in a train that was just starting, and I was miserable for days. And suddenly, the form reappeared in a dream one night. I woke up feeling humiliated and dejected by the futility of my hunt, and made my way back home. A few weeks later, I was enrolled as a member of the University of H. I found everything disappointing. The course of lectures on the history of philosophy which I attended was as uninspired and stereotyped as the activities of the undergrads. They were all so much to pattern. Everybody behaved in an identical way, and the animated gaiety on their boyish faces looked empty and artificial. But I was free. I had the whole day to myself. I lived in peace and comfort in a tumbled-down house just outside the town, and had a few volumes of Nietzsche on my table. I lived with him, felt the loneliness of his soul, shared his prescience of the fate that drove him unceasingly on, suffered with him, rejoiced that there had been one man who had relentlessly followed his destiny. Late one evening, I was strolling through the town. An autumn wind was blowing, and I could hear members of student clubs singing in the taverns. Clouds of tobacco smoke came from an open window with a profusion of songs, loud and solemn, yet uninspired and uniformly dead. I stood at the street corner, listening at this punctually rehearsed gaiety of youth rang out in the night from the two inns. Community spirit everywhere. Sitting about, together everywhere. Everywhere, escape from fate and flight to cozy firesides. Two men were walking slowly behind me. I caught a snatch of their conversation. "Isn't it just like the young men's house in a, black village?" said one. "Everything's the same down to the tattooing, which is now in fashion. Look, there you have young Europe." The voice sounded amazingly familiar. I'd heard it before. I followed the two of them along the dark lane. One was Japanese, small and elegant. I could see his smiling yellow face gleaming under a street lamp. The other was now speaking again. "I don't suppose it is any better with you in Japan. The people who don't make a beeline for the fireside are rare the whole world over. There's some here, too." I felt a mixture of joy and alarm as each word he said went through me. I knew the speaker. It was Demian. I followed him and the Japanese through the gusty night, along the dark lanes, listened to their conversation, and Demian's voice was as music in my ear. It had the familiar ring, the familiar assurance and calm, and all its old power over me. Everything was set to rights again. I had found him. When they arrived at the end of the street in the suburbs, the Japanese took his leave and opened the door of a house. Demian retraced his steps. I stood still, waiting for him in the middle of the street. My heart beat fast as I saw him coming towards me, with a springy tread and upright carriage. He was wearing a fawn mackintosh, and a thin walking stick dangled from his arm. He came on without any change in his uniform pace until he had practically reached me. Then he removed his hat, and I obtained a clearer view of the familiar, intelligent face, with the determined mouth and the peculiar radiance of his broad forehead. "Demian," I called out. He stretched his hand out towards me. "So, it's you, Sinclair. I've been expecting you." "Did you know I was here then?" "Not exactly, but I certainly hoped you were. I didn't see you until tonight. You've been on our tracks the whole time." "Did you recognize me straight away then?" "Of course. You have changed, naturally. But you still have the mark on you." "The mark? What sort of mark?" "In the old days we called it the mark of Cain, if you still remember. It's our sign. You've always had it. That's how I became your friend, but it's more evident now." I wasn't aware of that, but on second thoughts, yes, I was. Once I painted a picture of you, Demian, and I was astonished to find that it resembled me. Was that the mark? "Yes, that was it." "Good. Now you've understood. My mother will be pleased too." This frightened me. "Your mother, is she here?" "But she doesn't know me." "She knows about you. She'll recognize you without my having to tell her who you are. You've kept us without news of you for a long time." "I often wanted to write, but I couldn't. For some time now, I've felt in my bones that I must soon find you. I've been waiting for that every day." He thrust his arm under mine and walked along with me. An atmosphere of calm surrounded him, which infected me. We were soon chatting as we used to in the old days. Our thoughts went back to our time at school, the confirmation classes, also the more unfortunate period in the holidays. Only now our conversation was confined to our earliest and closest friendship, and the Franz Kromer business was not mentioned. Without noticing it, we got on a strange end of mysterious topics. We talked, like an echo of Demian's exchanges of views with his Japanese friend, of student life, and other things that seemed a far cry from that, and yet there was a fundamental and inner unity of idea behind everything Demian said. He spoke of the spirit of Europe and the signs of the times. On all sides, he said, we were seeing the reign of cooperation and the herd instinct. Love and freedom, nowhere. All this communal spirit from student club and glee club to the same spirit in the government was an inevitable development. It was community life, based on anxiety, fear, and opportunism. Within it was an outworn and indolent way of life approaching its collapse. Communal spirit, said Demian. It's a fine thing, but what we see flourishing everywhere is not really that. The real spirit will rise up, new, from the separate contribution of each individual, and for a time, it will transform the world. The only manifestation of communal spirit to be seen at present is the herd instinct at work. Human beings fly into each other's arms because they are afraid of each other. The master is afraid for themselves. They're a community composed entirely for themselves. And why are they afraid? Man is only afraid when he is not attuned to himself. They are afraid because they have never made themselves known to themselves. There are a community composed entirely of men who are afraid of the unknown element within themselves. They are all conscious of the fact that the laws of life they have inherited are no longer valid, that they are living according to archaic tablets of the law, that neither their religion nor customs are adapted to our present-day needs. For 100 years or so, Europe has done nothing but study and build factories. They know exactly how many grams of explosive are needed to kill a man, but they do not know how to pray to God. They did not even know how to remain happy and contented for one single hour. Just look at a student's club like this, or indeed, any place of amusement where rich people congregate. Hopeless. My dear Sinclair, nothing encouraging can emerge from that kind of thing. These men who come together in this nervous fashion are riddled with fear and evil. None of them trust each other. They cling to ideals which no longer exist, and stone anyone who sets up a new one. I have a presentiment that great divisions lie ahead. They will come, believe me, and come soon. Naturally, they will not improve the world. Whether the workers murder the manufacturers or the Russians and Germans shoot each other, it'll merely be a change of ownership. But it won't have been in vain. It will show up the bankruptcy of the present-day ideal. There'll be a sweeping away of Stone Age gods. This world, as it is now constituted, will perish, will be destroyed. It's happening before our eyes. And what will become of us in the meantime? I asked. Us? Perhaps we will be destroyed with it. But even that does not absolve us from responsibility. Around whatever remains of us, or around those who survive the catastrophe, will gather the spirit of the future. The will of humanity, which this Europe of ours, with its science and industry, fares as shouted down for a time, will be revealed. It will then become clear that the will of humanity is never and nowhere to be identified with that of our present communities, states and nations, clubs and churches. No. What nature wants of man is written in a few individuals. In you, in me. It was written in Christ. It was written in Nietzsche. Only for these important currents alone, which can, of course, assume different forms every day, will there be place when the communities of today will collapse. It was late when we stopped in front of a garden by the river. This is where we live, said Demian. Come and visit us soon. We want to see you very much. Full of elation, I retraced my long way back through the now chilly air. Here and there, noisy students were reeling home through the town. I had often marked the contrast between their comic kind of merriment and my solitary life, sometimes with scorn, sometimes with a feeling of deprivation. But never until today had I realized with calm and quiet confidence how little it mattered to me, and how remote and dead all that world now was for me. I called to mind the civil servants in my own town, worthy old gentlemen who clung to the memories of their drunken university days as if they were memories of a blessed paradise, and upon the vanished freedom of their student years, built a cult similar to that which poets or other romantics formerly devoted to childhood. Was it everywhere alike? It was always somewhere in the past that they looked for freedom and happiness, at a sheer dread lest they should be reminded of their own responsibilities and their own future course. They drank and made merry for a few years. Then they crawled into their shells and became serious-minded men in the service of the state. Yes, it was indolence. The spirit of indolence was among us. and the student's stupidity at least was not so stupid and evil as countless other stupidities. By the time I had arrived at my distant home and was preparing for bed, all these thoughts had vanished, and the whole of my day was focused expectantly on the great hope which the day had brought me. I was to be allowed to see Demian's mother as soon as I wished. Tomorrow. The students could hold their drunken celebrations, tattoos on their faces. The world could be indolent and wait for its destruction for all I cared. I was only waiting for one thing, for my fate to approach me in a new guise. I slept hard until late in the morning. The new day dawned like a solemn feast day of the kind I had not experienced since boyhood. I was full of great restlessness, but devoid of any sort of fear. I felt that an important day had dawned for me. I saw and experienced a changed world around me, expectant, meaningful, solemn. Even the gentle autumn rain had its beauty, and a calm, festive air full of happy, sacred music. For the first time, the outer world was perfectly attuned to the world within me, as when it is a special day for the heart, and one feels that it is blessed to be alive. No house, no shop window, no face disturbed me in the street. Everything was as it should be, without any of the flat and humdrum look of the everyday, ready and expectant to face its destiny with reverence. It was how the world had appeared to me, a small boy in the mornings of the big feast days, Christmas and Easter. I had forgotten that the world could still be so lovely. I had grown accustomed to my inner life, resigned to the fact that I had lost my feeling for the outside world, and that the loss of its bright colors was an inseparable part of the loss of childhood, and that one must to some extent pay for the freedom and maturity of the soul with the renunciation of those pure gleams of light. But now, entranced, I saw that all this had been clouded over, and that it was still possible as a liberated person and renouncer of childhood happiness to see the world shine and savor the delicious thrill of the child's vision. A moment came when I found my way back to the garden on the outskirts of the town, where I had taken my leave of Max Demian that night. Hidden behind high walls and mist-gray trees stood a little house, bright and homely. Tall plants grew behind a high glass wall. Behind glistening windows were dark walls with pictures and bookshelves. The front door led straight into a small, heated hall, and a silent, dark-skinned, old-maid servant with a white apron showed me in and took my coat. She left me alone in the hall. I looked around me and was immediately swept into the middle of my dream, for high up on the dark-paneled wall, above a door, hung a familiar picture in a black frame. It was my bird, with a golden-yellow sparrowhawk's head, struggling out of its terrestrial shell. Taken back, I stood there, motionless. In my heart were mixed feelings of joy and pain, as if at that moment everything that I had done and experienced before was coming back to me in the form of a reply and a fulfillment. I saw a host of pictures flashing before my mind's eye. The house at home with the old coat of arms above the door arch, the boy Demian sketching the carving, myself as a boy, terribly involved in the evil spell of my enemy Cromer, myself in adolescence, in my schoolroom by the table, quietly painting the bird of my desire, my soul lost in the intricacy of its own threads, and everything up to the present moment found a new echo in me, was corroborated, answered, and approved. With eyes moistened with tears, I gazed at the painting, absorbed in my reflections. Then my glance dropped. Under the picture of the bird and its open door stood a tall woman in a dark dress. It was she. I was unable to utter a word. From a face that resembled her son's, timeless and ageless and full of inward strength, the beautiful, dignified woman gave me a friendly smile. Her gaze was fulfillment, her greeting a homecoming. Silently, I stretched out my hands towards her. She took them both in her warm, firm hands. "You are Sinclair. I recognized you at once. Welcome." Her voice was deep and warm. I drank it up like sweet wine. And now I looked up and into her quiet face. The black, unfathomable eyes, at her fresh, ripe lips, the open, queenly brow that bore the sign. "How glad I am," I said, and kissed her hands. "I believe I've been on my way here my whole life, and now I've reached home at last." She gave a motherly smile. "One never reaches home," she said amiably. "But wherever friendly paths intersect, the whole world looks like home for a time." She was expressing what I had felt on my way to her. Her voice and even her words were like her son's, yet at the same time, quite different. Everything about her was riper, warmer, and more assured. But just as Max in the old days had never given the impression of being a boy, his mother did not look like the mother of a grown-up son. So young and charming was the aura that surrounded her. Face and hair, so firm and smooth her fair skin, so fresh her lips. More regal, even than in my dreams, she stood before me. This closeness was bliss. Her gaze, fulfillment. This, then, was the new form in which my fate was to reveal itself. No longer stern, no longer setting me apart, but afresh and cheerful. I made no resolutions, took no vows. I had attained my goal. The high point from which the continuing path was revealed distant and attractive, climbing to the promised land, shaded by treetops of approaching happiness, cooled nearby by gardens of every joy. Whatever might happen to me, I was blessed in my knowledge that this woman was in the world, that I could drink in her voice and breathe her presence. If she could only become a mother to me, a lover, a goddess, if she could just be here, if only my path could be close to hers. She pointed up to my sparrowhawk picture. "You never gave Max more pleasure than with this picture," she said reflexively. "And me too. We've been expecting you. When the painting came, we knew that you were on your way to us. When you were a small boy, Sinclair, my son came back home from school one day and said, 'There's a boy who has the mark on his forehead. I must have him for my friend.' It was you. You've not had an easy time, but we had confidence in you. You came across Max again when you were at home on holiday. You're about 16 years old. Max told me about it." I interrupted. "You told me that? That was the most miserable period of my life." "Yes. Max said to me, 'Sinclair has his worst time coming now. He's making another attempt to take refuge among the others. He's even become a pub crawler. But he won't be successful. His mark is momentarily obscured, but it sears him secretly underneath.' Isn't that true?" "Oh yes, exactly like that. Then I discovered Beatrice, and then at last a guide came to me. He was called Pistorius. Only then did it become clear why my boyhood had been so closely bound up with Demian's, and why I could not escape from him. Dear Ava, dear mother, I often thought I should have take my own life. Is the way as difficult as this for everybody?" She caressed my hair with her hand. It felt as light as a breeze. "It is always difficult to be born. You know, the bird did not find it easy to struggle out of the egg. Think back and ask yourself, was the way so hard then? Wasn't it beautiful too? Could you have wished a more beautiful or easier path?" I shook my head. "It was hard," I said, as if I were asleep. "It was hard until the dream came." She nodded and looked right into me. "Yes, you must find your dream. Then the way becomes easy. But no dream lasts. Each dream releases a new one, and you should not cling so fast to any particular one." I was profoundly shaken. Was that a warning note already? Was that a defensive move already? But it was all one. I was prepared to allow myself to be guided by her, and not inquire about the goal. I do not know, I said, how long my dream will last. I wish it could be eternal. My fate has received me under the picture of the bird like a mother, and like a lover, I belong to it and nothing else. Well, the dream is your fate, and as long as you remain faithful to it, she confirmed in serious tones. I was overcome by a sudden sadness and a longing to die in that enchanted hour. I felt my tears. What an infinity of time since I had last wept. Well, unceasingly in my eyes, I could not restrain them. I turned violently on my heel, walked to the window, and gazed into the distance beyond the plant pots with tear-blinded eyes. I heard her voice behind me. It was calm and yet as brimming with tenderness as a wine-filled beaker. Sinclair, you are a child. Your fate loves you indeed. One day, it'll be wholly yours, as you dream it will be, if you remain constant to it. I had regained my self-control, and I turned my face towards her again, and she gave me her hand. I have a few friends, she said, smiling. Just a handful of very close friends, who call me Frau Eva. You shall be one of them if you wish. She led me to the door, opened it, and indicated the garden. You'll find Max out there. I stood dazed and shaken under the tall trees. I did not know whether I was more awake or more in a dream than ever. The rain dripped gently from the branches. Slowly, I walked into the garden, which bordered the river. Finally, I found Demian. He was standing in an open summer house, stripped to the waist, and was doing some boxing practice with a suspended sandbag. I stopped, amazed. Demian looked strikingly handsome with his broad chest and firm, manly head. The raised arms with taut muscles were large and powerful. The movements came from the hips, shoulders and arms like gushing springs. Demian, I called, what are you doing here? He gave a cheerful laugh. Practicing. I've promised the little Jap a boxing match. He's as agile as a kitten and just as full of tricks, of course. But he won't pull it off with me, if it is a slight act of abasement that I owe him. He drew on his shirt and jacket. You've just been with Mother, I suppose, he asked. Yes, Demian, and what a wonderful mother you have. Frau Eva. The name suits her admirably. She's like a universal mother. He looked into my face thoughtfully for a moment. So you know her name already? You may well be proud, my lad. You're the first person she sold it to in the first hour of meeting. From this day on, I went in and out of their house like a son and brother and a lover too. When I closed the door behind me, or rather, as soon as I saw the tall trees in the garden rise up, I felt rich and happy. Outside was reality. Outside were streets and houses, and human beings, institutions, libraries, classrooms, but here was love and soul. This was the home of dream and legend. And yet we lived in no way cut off from the outside world. We often lived in the midst of it, in our thoughts and discussions, but on different ground. We were not divided off from the majority of men by boundaries, but by another kind of vision. It was our function to represent an island in the world, a kind of prototype, perhaps, to proclaim in our lives new potentialities by our way of living. I, who had been a solitary so long, learned about the companionship which is possible between human beings who have tasted utter and complete loneliness. I no longer hankered after the tables of the fortunate, nor the feasts of the blessed. I was no longer affected by envy or nostalgia when I watched the community life of others, and slowly I was initiated to the secret of those who bear the sign upon their brow. We who bore the sign might rightfully be considered odd by the world, even mad and dangerous. We were awake, or wakening, and our striving was directed at an ever-increasing wakefulness, whereas the striving and quest for happiness of the rest was aimed at identifying their thoughts, ideals, duties, their lives and fortunes more and more closely with that of the herd. That too was striving. That too was power and greatness. But whereas we, in our conception, represented the will of nature to renew itself, to individualize and march forward, the others lived in the desire for the perpetuation of things as they are. For them, humanity, which they loved as we did, was something complete that must be maintained and protected. For us, humanity was a distant goal towards which we were marching, whose image no one yet knows, whose laws were nowhere yet written down. That's the first part of Ava. We'll be finishing in the next part. Sleepless Tales. I'll catch you then. Thank you for joining me. Have a great night.